Hi, welcome back to Cubs and Culture for February 3rd, 2018. Discussing the King's Speech and the Social Network on that Oscar race. Okay, this is mostly going to be about the Social Network. It's about the story, it's a widely inaccurate, version of the founding of Facebook as a business. Again, Facebook has used something as like a placeholder for a business venture. And it's specifically built around sort of Zuckerberg, the character, not the actual guy, being resentful of not being included in terms of class society, and then being being corrupted because of greed and screwing over people. He's kind of a tragic figure at the end because he kind of pushes everyone away, and all he has is trying to connect via Facebook. The screenplay is fine. Aaron Sorkin is a good writer. Sometimes I wish he would kind of calm down on sort of the quips and sort of trying to be clever with the dialogue. In any case, the Social Network, its best feature is its screenplay. Now, the thing is, and why I really kind of don't think that highly of the Social Network, is it's really easy to imagine a much better film from that screenplay than what David Fincher actually gave with it. By far and large, Fincher does a lot of, both directorially and editorially, does a lot of like flashy crap, and sort of the sometimes it works. So like at the beginning where he's doing the Zuckerberg's putting together Face Smash, that sort of camera movements through windows, quick cuts and succession, that sort of flash works in that sequence because it's sort of making putting together Face Smash exciting. But most of the time it's actually at odds with sort of tonally, where the director is calling way too much attention to his craft and like, hey, look at what I can do. Look how sort of dramatic and over the top he can be. So like the worst sort of example of this is that goddamn boating regalia scene when the twins are rowing and they lose. It totally doesn't belong in the movie, at least how it's shot, because it's way too over the top and striking. Like I understand that, like, yes, it's a race, and that they lose there is honorable because it's a fair race, etc. But at the same time, it's way too over stated, and it just Fincher doesn't know when to stop, and he has sort of a need to show off technically what he can do, and it doesn't really fit well with Aaron Sorkin's screenplay in the movie. So it's really easy that a more sort of subdued directorial style would have made the Social Network better, and that's sort of why I don't think of it as the best picture of the year, and why I honestly I wouldn't have been really upset if Fincher wouldn't have won over Hooper for Best Director. Okay, so that's sort of my general take on the Social Network. So let me now switch over to talking about the screenplay for The King's Speech. So give me a moment, please. Okay, so The King's Speech is... Okay, so one of the things you got to realize, or talking about this movie, is what sort of story it's telling. It's actually mostly it's a buddy comedy, or a buddy dramedy. It just so happens that the two buddies in it are the King of England and his speech therapist, because George VI was a stutterer or a stammerer. I really don't know what the difference between a stutter and a stammer is. It might be an American-British thing. In any case, it's not really about the education crisis with his brother, Edward VIII or whatever, nor is it about the buildup of World War II, really. I mean, those have elements of it, but it's mostly about this poor guy who has who's required to speak publicly, and he has a stammer, and he's trying to correct it, and sort of the friendship he forms on between him and his speech therapist. So it also kind of has again, a buddy comedy or buddy dramedy sort of is a good description of it, because it has the sort of big sort of arcs that like a buddy story has, in that they have a meeting, they have a falling out, they both apologize, and they come back together. So there is a lot of there's times in which the education crisis around Edward, especially around Churchill, is ahistoric, where it's just kind of flatly wrong. So like Churchill was much more in favor of Edward the VIII staying on the throne, while the movie kind of implies he was pro George VI adding it, and then sort of the buildup of World War II is sort of messy, and then there's sort of other aspects that the screenplay just doesn't go into in terms of the history. So, for example, George V, i.e., George VI's father, who was actually euthanized. And I think it was with morphine. Anyway, he was euthanized, which the family sort of authorized, etc. The movie doesn't go into that sort of thing, because it's not really interested in this. And so, like, the thing is, by far and large, if you look at the screenplay, I don't think there's places where you can pick at in terms of the history being untold. But honestly, other than some of the Churchland stuff, I don't really think it's ahistoric. It's mostly not told. And then sort of the other thing, and I think a lot of people don't tap into this, is the movie really is using this sort of friendship between the King of England and a commoner, and it's also important that the commoner's Australian because of bigotry against Australians within British empires. It's actually really talking about class issues and the way in which, especially like hereditary privilege, that system is trapping for people with the privilege. So let me kind of explain what I mean by this. Okay, so in terms of like class, social class, one of the things about systems of oppression, and I want to try to be careful here, people who are of the dominant group or the oppressive group, they are by far and large 90+% of the time, they get sort of a systematic advantages which don't hurt them. It's an advantage, so their lives end up being materially better than marginalized populations, and especially in terms of like class. But there's also times in which, because of sort of expectations of role, it's not really oppression, because dominant groups can't be oppressed, but it's sort of distortion of humanity around it. So, like, let me just use sort of a really pitched example. Men have privileges that women don't have. The default in our society is male, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But there is something, crying in public, for men to cry in public is because of the way in which patriarchy and toxic masculinity works. Men can't cry in public. It's considered too unmanly. And that sort of distorts their humanity. Now, the thing is, that also works in class issues. And so one of the things I really like about this movie is it really is discussing the way in which hereditary privilege distorts basic humanity, because the only reason it mattered that George VI had a stammer was because he was the King of England. And in a sense, sort of societal expectations on role is sort of the antagonism in this film. This is why Bertie has an issue, why he needs speech therapy. This is why Edward VIII having to marry Wallis Simpson, why he's something actually portrayed sympathetically in the film, because in the way in which it was expectation that as the head of the church he couldn't marry a divorced woman. etc. It's why George V complains about having to be brought low by having to be basically actors because of this new technology in terms of radio. And so, like, in a lot of ways, so here's the thing. As the King of England, obviously, George VI's life was a very privileged life, and there's not really a whole lot of, like, there's not a lot of ways in which you should feel bad for him, because he is, in fact, the King of England. But at the same time, one of the things the screenplay does really, really well, and mostly accurately, talks about the way in which hereditary privilege distorts humanity, and why it's sort of entrapping systems for everyone. Though in a way, the movie comes up needing that, like, we sort of need this sort of symbol around monarchy. The movie's actually kind of conservative on that point. Now, with all that being said, even though I really like the screenplay and I really like the story, and I think it's exploring class in a very interesting way, David Slidler's screenplay could have been too dry, in that it's very, very British. It's sort of based on this one friendship between a speech therapist and his famous patient, where in lesser director's hand or with lesser actors, it could have been very, very dry. The movie also could have been very, very slight, because the story is basically man makes bad speech, man gets speech therapy, man makes okay speech. Like, in terms of its basic plot, that's all it is. It could have been very, very slight. So it's really Tom Hooper who makes this movie what it is. I'm going to spend a lot of time talking about his direction in the next section. Okay, I'll be back in a moment. See ya.